The top wide receivers that we drafted in fantasy football have already undergone a ton of changes to begin the season. Justin Jefferson lost his quarterback, but did he get an upgrade with Carson Wentz? Ja'Marr Chase lost his quarterback. I don't think he got an upgrade in Jake Browning. Malik Neighbors lost his starting quarterback. I'm pretty sure he got an upgrade in Jackson Dart, or at least I hope so. And CeeDee Lamb, he may just be lost at this point. Injuries, poor quarterback play, whatever you want to talk about, some of the top wide receivers right now for fantasy football aren't really at the top. So let's dive into the week 4 start and sit analysis. We'll find out how comfortable we feel with some of these guys this week, and are there some under the radar wide receivers that we should be paying more attention to. And Thursday Night Football is going to have one of the most consistent wide receivers so far this season, Jackson Smith-Njigba, with Seattle going up against Arizona. And JSN is playing super well right now, and if you drafted him, the change in offense hasn't affected him whatsoever. 6 targets, 5 receptions, over 90 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown last week. He's giving you tons of volume and touchdown potential, which is exactly what we want from our top wide receivers. Cooper Kupp has one good performance to start the year, but he officially is probably a shell of his former self, and Torrey Horton is going to have to be a fringe start for a couple of reasons. Number one, his big playability. He can strike from anywhere on the field, but for those of you that play in leagues where you get some sort of return yards or you count special team statistics, Torrey Horton is just as electrifying as a return man as he is a wide receiver. So that gives you a little extra added wrinkle if you're able to get fantasy points from that. Right now, the Seattle Seahawks are allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, which isn't necessarily great for Marvin Harrison Jr. But you know what's worse for Marvin Harrison Jr.? Not having a defender for 10 yards near you and dropping a wide open pass. I don't know what's going on with Marv, and to be honest with you, he just doesn't look like he's extremely focused on the game of football. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly the case, but last year, he just didn't seem like he took it serious enough. This year, we're having drops that are absolutely horrible that he shouldn't be having. So maybe he's just pressing a little bit, and maybe things will get a little bit better as of right now. But what we've seen so far in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s young career, he's barely a fringe start wide receiver. He's a guy that if you're putting him in as a wide receiver 3, that's not really that bad of an option. If you're relying on him as a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2, you need an upgrade. I know I've already mentioned it on the other 2 start and sit videos, but Sunday morning we've got football, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Minnesota and Pittsburgh are kicking off over in Ireland. Justin Jefferson saw a little bit of a bump in kind of his overall statistics last week. Yards aren't a whole lot better than what we've seen from him so far this season, but the move to Carson Wentz with J.J. McCarthy injured did seem to give the offense a little bit of a boost. Some of that also may have come just from Jordan Mason. The most interesting aspect, though, this week for Minnesota is going to be the return of Jordan Addison, who is back after his 3-game suspension. Are there going to be targets readily available for him? If so, where do the targets come from? Will Carson Wentz be locked in with Jordan Addison? I don't really know exactly what to expect from him, but he's got touchdown potential, and that's why he's going to be a fringe start. The Minnesota defense has been spectacular so far this season, and they are allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. For that reason alone, I think we need to go ahead and skip out on DK Metcalf in this matchup. So far this season, he hasn't shown us a ton of upside. He hasn't been awful with his floor, which is kind of what we talked about when he was drafted this offseason. We're drafting him for his floor and the amount of targets he can end up getting. Calvin Austin has had a little bit of a bigger impact than I think people expected. And I think that he probably could end up being a safer bet this week than DK Metcalf just because of the type of player he is. But in all honesty, going up against Minnesota, I really don't want to rely on either of these guys overseas. I don't think many people saw the Atlanta defense being one of the best in all of football, while their offense was the side of the ball that was struggling tremendously. Right now, to wide receivers, they are allowing the 4th 4th fewest fantasy points per game, which is not great for the Washington pass catchers. As of this recording, there has been no decision on Jaden Daniels as of yet, and whether or not he will play this week. We'll continue to monitor that. But more importantly is the fact that Terry McLaurin, as of this recording, sounds like he's not going to play. Now, a full decision has not been made on that either, but it sounded like earlier in the week he was trending towards being out. I'll keep him as a fringe start right now just because we're not 100% sure if he's playing or not. And if he does play, we'll need to talk about whether or not we think he's actually healthy enough to be in our lineup in such a tough matchup. But even if he does play, he's probably limited. Debo's going to be the main guy. We've got to play him. We know for sure that Michael Penix will be starting at quarterback this week, even though he did come out early last week and was replaced by Kirk Cousins. Raheem Morris made it very clear in his press conference. Michael Penix is still the starter. So we're going to have to continue moving forward with him, and hopefully he can get headed in the right direction. I don't think his coaching staff is doing him a whole lot of favors either, but that's a different rant for a different video. For the wide receivers, Drake London, Darnell Mooney this week, I still believe Drake London has the opportunity to be a wide receiver one. He was a guy that was outside the top 24 wide receivers to begin last season, and look how he ended. Everything ended up being just fine, and we're going to hope that that continues to happen and things get better for him. For right now, I'm going to list him as a start. It's been a rough start to the year for him. In week 1, he had a touchdown taken away that quite honestly shouldn't have been. I still believe that he caught that, and a lot of people watching the video thought he caught it as well. NFL overruled it. They ended up taking it away, unfortunately, after replay, and he doesn't get that. Week 2, he was injured. He wasn't even fully healthy. He was out there more as a decoy, didn't have a ton of volume. So again, another bad week in week 2. Fortunately enough, back to last week, 8 targets. He played 86% of the snaps. He appears to be fully healthy again, and we're going to hope he has an upwards trajectory. And this matchup against Washington, if Washington is keeping a little bit of a lead, or at least neutral game script, Darnell Mooney had 11 targets last week. I could see him easily being another flex option again. For New Orleans and Buffalo, Chris Olave right now is borderline startable, and it's crazy to think that because this guy is seeing a ton of targets. 13 more targets in week 2, and we can barely even put him as a start right now. And it's just because the yards aren't there. The big plays aren't there right now. The Buffalo defense is allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers right now. But over the first 3 weeks of the season, Chris Olave has seen 13, 10, and 14 targets. It's an absolute insane amount, and he is flex consideration based on just that alone. But he's barely cracking 50 receiving yards per game, and that's one of the reasons why he hasn't had that high of a ceiling as of yet. Keep giving him the volume. Keep him stashed because he's going to be a solid option during your bye weeks. He's going to be a solid option if you have any injuries. He's getting so much volume right now that you could plug him in, and while you won't be super happy with the numbers, he's not going to leave you hanging either. I want to wish everybody the best of luck. If you have Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and probably a majority of people have moved on from Josh Palmer at this point, but if you haven't thrown him to the mix as well, good luck trying to figure out which one of these guys is going to be the best wide receiver in any given week. I mean, after week 1, it looked like Keon Coleman was going to be the guy. Everybody in the comment section, when I said, hey, I don't fully trust these wide receivers still, everyone was like, Keon Coleman, Keon Coleman, Keon Coleman. And I get it. He was fantastic. He was the wide receiver 4 in week 1. But since then, he's been the wide receiver 79 and wide receiver 74. Khalil Shakir, he was a flex option in week 1 at wide receiver 29. Then he dropped all the way to wide receiver 104, and we were like, well, maybe Shakir doesn't have it either. Back to wide receiver 2 last week at wide receiver 22. And for Josh Palmer, I think he's going to have some big plays here or there, but he's definitely not going to be the guy over Keon Coleman or Khalil Shakir. But you have to throw Dalton Kincaid into the mix as well, especially with how well he's playing right now and the fact that they play Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox together on the field quite a bit. And if you haven't heard, they're running the ball really well with James Cook right now. So Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir are probably going to be fringe starts every week for the time being until maybe we see a little bit of separation on who's going to be the safer guy, on who's going to have the better floor each and every week. It might take 5-6 weeks for us to really start to see who it may be. The Lions are allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers right now, so you're probably going to feel at least halfway decent about Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman for Cleveland this week. But again, this is a defense very much like last year. They play a ton of man-to-man coverage, and their goal is to get after the quarterback. So if they have a play where they don't get after the quarterback as well as they should and they don't execute, they're going to leave some guys open and they're going to give up bigger plays. That's why Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy have to at least be considered this week against the Lions. Now, do I think they both have huge volume? Maybe not. If Detroit plays as well as they did against Baltimore and against Chicago, then they could have a pretty sizable lead, and that's going to be definitely more volume for both of these guys. But I also think that Cedric Tillman, he's probably a big play guy. I think he could end up getting away for a play or two and potentially score a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy may be the same way. If they don't get to Joe Flacco right away and they air it out, Jerry Jeudy could have a big play or two. But it's going to be all about the big play. So I can't list either one as an actual start because I think there's a really low floor here. But I think they need to be fringe starts because I think they both have a decent ceiling, giving the potential for a big play. It's crazy year after year the excuses that are made to not draft Amon-Ra St. Brown. And it feels like he's almost becoming like the Derrick Henry of wide receivers because we've talked about it during the offseason with Derrick Henry. Everybody makes excuses, especially for the last 3 or 4 years, on why they don't want to draft Derrick Henry. Age, workload, whatever it may be. I don't like Derrick Henry enough. I'm not going to draft him. It feels like it's the same way with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Tons of excuses are made as to why I don't want to draft Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I would much rather have Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, whoever else in front of them. And at the end of the day, Amon-Ra St. Brown just keeps producing. He now has 4 touchdowns on the season. He is absolutely killing it. And he's not just a guy that's being utilized in open space. He is a guy that is being utilized in the red zone as well. And I talked about it this offseason with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Him and Jared Goff have a historically good connection. When both of these guys are all said and done with their careers, they might go down as one of the best tandems of all time. And you're probably scoffing at that comment right now, and you're like, there's no way, Kyle, it's Jared Goff. And I get why you'd be apprehensive. But when you take a look at the numbers that these guys have, the connection is out of this world. When Amon-Ra St. Brown is targeted, he very rarely misses. So yeah, leave him in your lineup. Enjoy the points every single week. There's going to be some weeks here or there where maybe Jameson Williams gets his. Maybe Gibbs is utilized a little bit more in the passing game than we would like. Maybe Sam Laporta gets his. And Amon-Ra St. Brown may not have a great day. But by the end of the season, he'll be exactly where he has been the last couple of years. One of the safest options that you could have and one of the best picks that you made in the first round. Oh yeah, don't forget about Jameson Williams. Big play dependent, as usual. He's always going to be a fringe start unless it's an absolute hammer smash play against a defense that's just playing poor. Tet McMillan is getting a super solid matchup this week. He's had a really safe floor based on volume alone so far this season, but hopefully Tet can find a little bit of upside going up against New England, who's allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game. Now, with the rest of the wide receivers for Carolina, I'm only looking to Tet McMillan. I'm not really focused on anybody else at this point. Bryce Young, the first couple of weeks of the season, threw the ball an awful lot. But Tet McMillan is the guy that's seeing a majority of those targets. Hunter Renfrow, the first couple of weeks of the season, he was seeing a decent amount of targets. And even last week, saw 4 targets, really not that bad. But I don't think he's a guy that's going to be somebody that we want to consistently put in our lineup. The one thing I will say about Hunter Renfrow, when we start getting into the bye weeks, that is where he could end up being a little bit better for our teams because he might be a guy with a safe enough floor that we could plug and play and not feel awful about the fantasy points that we get. Carolina is allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game, and when you look at the New England wide receivers, it's really hard to gauge who should we trust and who should we be throwing out there every single week. Even Kayshon Boutte, after a really solid week 1, He only scored a touchdown in week 2, which kind of saved his week, and then in week 3, he wasn't all that great either. So he's even on a downward trend right now. After 8 targets in week 1, Boutte only has 4 targets over the last 2 weeks combined. He is still playing the most snaps though, which is good for his potential fantasy value moving forward. Last week, Boutte played 76% of the snaps. Hollins was at 62, Diggs at 53, and Douglas at 39. But Mac Hollins had more targets last week. This is a tougher matchup. So if you're thinking about going with Kayshon Boutte, I do potentially think we find ourselves in a situation where we're praying for a touchdown. I really don't know what the running back position is going to look like either. Will Stevenson be out there? Will it be Travion Henderson? Does Hunter Henry see the same amount of targets that he did last week? Does he get a little bit more consistent? And does there become a point where Stefon Diggs starts to play more snaps as well? If the wide receivers aren't being super productive and Stefon Diggs starts to get healthier and healthier after his surgery last season, at some point I would realistically think that his snap percentage starts to climb into the 60s and even the 70s, and they probably start to utilize him a little bit more as well. So just be cautious with this situation, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it. But Boutte to me is really a fringe guy at best right now. The Chargers have a great matchup going up against the New York Giants, allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game. And who would have guessed that Quentin Johnston would have been the wide receiver 5 through 3 weeks of the season? Now, I'll tell you all right now, did I think he would have been wide receiver 5? No, but if you all listened to one of my deep sleeper videos this year, I told you all that Quentin Johnston had an opportunity and he was not being talked about enough, and he was going so late that he would cost nothing just to be on your bench to see if the touchdown potential was there. Well, guess what? Not only has the touchdown potential been there, but the volume has been there as well. Him and Keenan Allen have completely unseated Ladd McConkey as the top 2 options on this team. And I don't think anybody really thought that was going to happen. But Ladd McConkey was one of the guys that I was not super high on. I did not love his draft status this year, especially after Keenan Allen signed. And because of that, I was being really cautious with him. For those of you that invested in Ladd McConkey as your wide receiver 1, that is not going to end up working out well for you. Those that invested in him as your wide receiver 2, we could still potentially get there. And in a matchup that's this good and this favorable, Ladd McConkey hopefully can get back in the right direction and propel himself to some better fantasy value moving forward. I don't love this matchup. I'm not feeling warm and cozy about it. Last week, both of these guys had a great matchup, and neither Neighbors or Robinson produced enough for us. This week, the New York Giants have decided to move to Jackson Dart, which could still be a really good thing for these guys. And I'm going to hold out hope because I love Jackson Dart, and I think he can be a game changer at the quarterback position at the NFL level. But he is still young, and this offense has not been that good over the last couple of years. So because of that, I'm holding out hope that Malik Neighbors can get us enough volume that he can be a start this week and maybe see a big play or two that can help propel his yards even if he doesn't have a ton of catches. Wan'Dale Robinson is going to need more than 4 targets, however. And if that becomes a trend where Jackson Dart isn't looking his way because of the change at the quarterback position, then Wan'Dale Robinson could quickly become a guy that we're no longer interested in. But we'll monitor that. This week, he's a fringe start. If you're looking for a guy that could potentially give you a solid floor because of negative game script, then Wan'Dale Robinson could be that guy. But I don't look at him anything other than a wide receiver 3 or flex option at best. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both deserve an award, and it's not the award that you think. It would be one for giving managers the most heartburn when trying to make a decision on whether or not to start them. Because honestly, when it comes down to it, where you drafted A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, you have to start them. More than likely, you don't have guys that you can realistically trust over A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith, unless you drafted really, really well in the later rounds of your draft, or you hit the waiver wire early and struck gold. If for some reason you have a team that has like 5 options that have top 24 potential every single week, then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith may be easier to bench than most. But for those of you that drafted these guys as a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, that makes it really hard to sit either of them. We gotta hope Tampa Bay keeps this game close, because if Tampa Bay doesn't keep up with Philadelphia, you're gonna see a lot of Saquon Barkley. If the game is closer, or if Tampa Bay can keep the lead for a majority of it, then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith will be more involved. But again, how do you sit either of them? This is a pretty solid matchup. We've got to have them in our lineup if we own them. I mean, there's a really good chance that Emeka Egbuka could see 9,000 targets this week, and that's because Mike Evans more than likely will end up missing this week. No official word as of yet, but he did suffer a strain last week in his game, and it sounded like he was going to miss some time. It wasn't going to be an extended period, but there was a thought that it could be a couple of weeks before Mike Evans was going to be healthy enough to be back out there. For the wide receivers in Tampa Bay, Emeka Egbuka is really the only one that we need to discuss in depth, and we don't even really need to talk about it that in depth. With no Mike Evans, he's going to see a ton of targets. It could be probably 9,000 targets this week for Emeka Egbuka. How good are the targets? I don't know about that, because it's going to be interesting to see how they deploy Egbuka as the wide receiver 1, because the wide receiver 2 is going to be Sterling Shepard, and both of these guys are much better when it comes to playing out of the slot than they would be out wide. So where exactly do each one of these guys line up on a consistent basis? Emeka Egbuka, I'm absolutely going to run him out there. No questions asked. He's in your lineup. Sterling Shepard, I'm not going to consider this week. He did see 5 targets last week. He had 80 receiving yards. I mean, going up against the New York Jets, that's not bad. Could he have something similar this week? Absolutely. But I don't think it's a guy that we need to be thinking about putting in our lineup unless we're in like a 16-team league and we're looking for somebody to just help us get through this week. I'm getting way more criticism on how I'm saying Alec Eomaner's name than the actual analysis for him. And I think that's a little weird, but it is what it is. But let me just clear the air on something real quick. Alec Eomaner was like the 3rd player that I did a rookie scouting report on back in January, even before he was drafted. I start all of my rookie scouting in January of each year. And Eomaner was a guy that I looked at very early, and I watched a ton of tape of him at Stanford. And even in January, I was telling people in Discord, hey, watch out for this guy. If he lands in the right situation, he could end up being a very talented wide receiver. Stanford sucks. For the amount of film I watched, every single broadcaster pronounced his name Alec Eomaner. Every single one. So if I'm saying his name wrong, I apologize, but that is what I heard for the hours of film I watched on this dude. Now, it does sound like it might be more towards Eomaner, and if that's what it is, then that's what I'll move forward with. But Alec Eomaner is becoming the wide receiver 1 in Tennessee, and I'm not shocked. This kid is ultra talented. He just played at a crappy university with a crappy offense. Stanford's a great university. I don't mean it like that. I mean their program has become crappy. But neither way, he's a guy that he's being looked at in the red zone. He's being looked at in between the 20s. He's being looked at all over the place. And Eomaner is going to be a guy that we should probably start considering as a player in our lineup every single week. Has he made it into wide receiver 2 status on a consistent basis as of yet? Maybe not consistently, but I do think that if you own Calvin Ridley, you're probably putting Calvin Ridley away for right now, and Eomaner is going to be the guy moving forward. For Houston, Tennessee is allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, so Nico Collins has got big time upside again this week. Christian Kirk is going to be the interesting one to watch though, because last week he had 8 targets in his first game of the season. So it feels like CJ Stroud could start looking his way an awful lot. And if he's going to be seeing 6, 7, or 8 targets every single week, he's going to be a fringe start guy every single week. Jaden Higgins, the 2nd round pick, he was kind of the loser in all of this because he dropped down to only 44% of the snaps. Right now, it's Collins, Kirk, and Hutchinson in terms of the order in which guys are getting snaps. Collins, absolutely a start. Kirk, I don't want to go that way just yet, but I would not be shocked if he gives us wide receiver 3 numbers this week. Michael Pittman has finished as a wide receiver 10 twice this season. His only performance that he didn't was going up against Patrick Surtain in week 2. Michael Pittman may be Daniel Jones' favorite guy, and it's good to see. Couple of years ago, we loved Michael Pittman on this channel. We thought that he had breakout potential, and we thought he had top 12 potential, and it just hasn't really come to fruition. And heading into this year, we wanted to like Michael Pittman, but it felt like he was an afterthought in last year's offense. And for whatever reason it was, whether it was offensive scheme or the quarterback, it was just hard to trust what the offense was going to look like, especially with Daniel Jones taking over. But Daniel Jones is looking solid, which is crazy to say, but it is. I'll give him props. Dude has looked really good this year. Maybe it's New York. Maybe it's not Daniel Jones. But Michael Pittman for sure is a start moving forward because of how solid he has been to begin the season. Alec Pierce dealing with a concussion right now. Not 100% sure if he'll be able to go this week, so we'll monitor that. That's a big play guy that would be missing. For the Los Angeles Rams, in terms of target share, Puka Nacua and Davante Adams should be started every single week. Davante Adams is scoring touchdowns right now. He's got a decent amount of volume as well. Puka Nacua has a out-of-this-world amount of volume, and he hasn't been able to find the end zone anytime recently, so hopefully he can do that soon. But the volume alone is more than enough. Thank God Matthew Stafford is healthy. There was a scare with his back this offseason, and it did worry us here a little bit. But he's fully healthy, and that's what you want to see. And with a healthy Stafford, both of these guys will produce. Should you be considering Brian Thomas Jr. as a sit this week? That would be really tough for a guy that might have been drafted at the end of the first, maybe second round, depending on the size of the league that you're in. But going up against San Francisco this week, who's currently allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game, we have to start asking ourselves some really tough questions. And at the wide receiver position, Brian Thomas Jr. is one of those. And it's not just BTJ in this lineup. Travis Hunter hasn't played all that well. Parker Washington, for whatever reason, is getting 11 targets in last week's game. Why is he getting so many targets? Brenton Strange has been up and down. This offense just doesn't feel like it has an identity right now. And Liam Cohen is probably trying to figure that out as well. And Trevor Lawrence is trying to figure that out. And maybe it will take some time with a new offense. There's a lot of people that feel like Trevor Lawrence isn't the guy, that he's extremely overrated, and that we keep running him over there just because he was the #1 draft pick one season. Whatever the reason, until we see more consistent production, not targets. Because the only reason Brian Thomas Jr. is a fringe start right now is because of the targets. But if he starts losing targets and Parker Washington keeps getting 11 of them, BTJ is going to be in some serious, serious trouble. Keep with the targets, and we still have a shot with Brian Thomas Jr. The yards could come at some point in time. The touchdowns could come at some point in time. For right now, I don't think that we can sit him. But if you play in a shallower league and you have really good options, and maybe you only have to start 2 wide receivers, maybe Brian Thomas Jr. isn't your best bet. Jacksonville's doing pretty solid on defense to begin the year as well. They're currently allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And Ricky Pearsall, he's the guy right now. Juwan Jennings didn't play last week. No word as of yet if he'll be ready to go in week 4. So we'll continue to monitor that. The volume was great with Pearsall last week. No Juwan Jennings equaled 11 targets for Ricky Pearsall. It was him and Christian McCaffrey over and over again last week. If Jennings plays, does Pearsall see less targets? Does McCaffrey see less targets? The good news is Brock Purdy is still expected back this week, even though Mac Jones was the guy that kind of was giving the offense a boost the last couple of weeks in the absence of Brock Purdy. But we know Brock Purdy and Ricky Pearsall have a solid connection. So I will start him again this week, even though it is a tougher matchup, and we still don't know about Jennings. Zay Flowers saw 20 targets the first 2 weeks of the season. He was the wide receiver 1 and then the wide receiver 31, which isn't great, but the volume was awesome to begin the year. Last week, he dropped down to 3 targets. It was Mark Andrews, it was Rashad Bateman, it was running the football with Derrick Henry. Zay Flowers, this is the type of inconsistencies we've got to be careful with the Baltimore offense. Now, I'm going to start Zay Flowers this week going up against Kansas City because this has all the makings of being a back and forth offensive affair. And Zay Flowers will end up getting more targets this week. I'm sure they'll figure out a way to get him back into the game plan. But you have to be cautious of Baltimore because this is going to happen with the wide receivers. and the tight ends. They're going to disappear at times, and then they're going to come back. We saw it with Zay Flowers last year. He was getting a ton of targets to begin the season, and then as the season went on, he got less and less, and then he was averaging less by the end of the season. That's just not what we want to see. Now, I am going to list Rashad Bateman as a fringe start. He's only had one solid game so far this season. It was up against Detroit, but like I just said, a back and forth affair in Kansas City. Lamar Jackson's going to be throwing the ball an awful lot. I would expect Rashad Bateman to see a big play or two. Tyquan Thornton has slowly morphed into a big play threat that's consistently being looked at by the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. And because of that, he may be the best bet at wide receiver for right now, and we'll have to see what happens to him when Xavier Worthy returns too. Over the last 2 games, Tyquan Thornton has 14 targets. He's caught 7 of them for 130 yards, and he has 2 touchdowns. And honestly, those numbers could be even bigger, but a couple of weeks ago, Patrick Mahomes overthrew him on a wide open deep ball where he probably would have scored a touchdown again. And Hollywood Brown, he had 16 targets in week 1. Over the last 2 weeks, he's dropped to 5 and 6. Going up against Baltimore, again, like I mentioned for them, it's going to be an offensive slugfest, and that's why I'll keep him listed as a fringe start. We still don't know about Xavier Worthy. We're not 100% sure when he's going to come back, and when he comes back, how healthy will he actually be. It sounds like he's going to have to wear a brace on his arm, because if he doesn't, he's going to have surgery, which would take him out for the entire season anyway. So he's going to give it a shot when he comes back, but I don't know how good he's going to be when he comes back either. So keep an eye on this situation. If you're trying to roll out Kansas City wide receivers, it might be a little risky for the next few weeks. For Chicago and Las Vegas, let's call it what it is. Rome Odunze is the wide receiver 1 in Chicago, and it's not close to begin the year. Whether it's a scheme thing, whether Caleb Williams is just gelling with him more right now, DJ Moore is basically an afterthought when it comes to Rome Odunze. And if you invested in Rome Odunze, you're loving it right now. And he was a breakout candidate for us this season, so we also love seeing it. And this week against Las Vegas, they get a defense currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing offenses. Now, a lot of people are going to ask about Luther Burden, and honestly, he's had one big play this season that people are getting freaked out about. It was a 65-yard touchdown catch last week. Outside of that, he had 2 catches for 36 yards, which is not fantasy viable. DJ Moore had 5 targets last week. He found the end zone, but that's not nearly enough volume. Right now, the pecking order is Rome Odunze. He's a must-start moving forward. He's the wide receiver 1, and he clearly deserves it. Number 2 is DJ Moore. He's more of a fringe start. He's a guy that if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's probably not going to give you a ton of fantasy points. And Luther Burden is strictly big play dependent. I think you're going to see some big plays from time to time, and I also think you're going to see him completely disappear from time to time as well. The Chicago Bears are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game, and I want to go in on Jakobi Meyers this week. I want to go in on Trey Tucker this week. And by God, I wish Dante Thornton would get going as well. But Las Vegas's offense is kind of all over the place right now. Brock Bowers is only the tight end 8, which if it was any other tight end, you'd be fine with that. But it's Brock Bowers. You wanted him to be a top 3 tight end. Ashton Jeanty hasn't been able to run the football, and they're throwing the football an awful lot right now. But Jakobi Meyers has been inconsistent. Trey Tucker had 3 touchdowns last week. Does he keep that up? This is a solid matchup, so I'm going to list Jakobi Meyers and Trey Tucker as fringe starts this week because I think they can still give you some fantasy viable performances. And right now, it looks like Trey Tucker is the main guy. I just said it, 3 touchdowns last week. He had a touchdown back in week 1. He could be the main wide receiver moving forward. And if he is, then absolutely he should be in your lineup. And if you've picked him up off waivers, that's great. But I don't know if I'm just shoving him into your lineup right away and expecting high upside every single week. So this week, I look at these guys as fringe assets. If we're starting them as wide receiver 3s, I feel pretty good about that. If you're starting them as flex options and you don't have a safer running back over them, I'm feeling okay about that. But I don't want to start them as like a wide receiver 2 right now. My underdog must-watch matchup of the week at the wide receiver position is going to be Green Bay and Dallas. And while we would love to see CeeDee Lamb out there, I highly doubt that's going to happen. And even if you can't bet on CeeDee Lamb being out there, That's just fine. There's going to be plenty of other wide receiver talent in this game. And you gotta wonder if Jake is cooking up anything with our underdog picks this week that include Matthew Golden or George Pickens, because those are the two guys that I am keeping an eye on the most this week. And on Friday, Jake will be posting a video with some of his favorite plays of the week. You can also find some of his plays over on Underdog, and of course, if you're a member, we post his plays in there as well. And I'm loving what I see for the potential in this matchup for Matthew Golden going up against a defense that's allowing the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. But the only way that you can get in on the action with us is by getting signed up over on Underdog. So if you haven't done so, download their app. Create a new account, use code word headliners when you make the account, and you make an initial deposit of at least $10. When you do that, you're gonna get a super special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit. I'm talking like a wide receiver over 0.5 receiving yards. You're gonna love pairing that with some of the picks that we'll offer up this week as well. You're also going to get a deposit bonus on top of it. So you can get a few different plays in this week and potentially see a green wave come into your account. By the way, the green wave is what we call winning tickets in our Discord. So if you want to see hashtag green wave, join us over on Underdog this week. Download the app, code headliners, deposit at least $10. You'll be glad you did. Romeo Doubs is a start for me in this matchup. He still feels like he could be the guy that is one of the safer options. Matthew Golden could have a big week, and I know you don't want to hear it. And for those of you that were sold on Matthew Golden to begin the season, we're not giving up just yet. I can't do it. A solid week last week, a step in the right direction. I'll take it. But in the 2 weeks prior to that, he was overthrown by Jordan Love on 3 potential touchdowns. That's not Matthew Golden's fault. Him and Jordan Love will get on the same page soon enough. And even though Doubs had only 2 targets last week, I think he's the safest bet in a matchup going up against one of the best opportunities to score fantasy points for wide receivers. While Matthew Golden, I think this could be the week. I might be wrong and I might eat my words later on, but I think this is the week that Matthew Golden finally shows why he was drafted in the first round. Now, Dallas isn't getting a matchup that is nearly as good, Green Bay allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game, and CeeDee Lamb hasn't officially been ruled out as of yet, but I don't know if he's going to play either. He essentially told everybody after the game, I'm fine, I'm playing, but he's got a high ankle sprain, and it sounds like he's more likely to miss 2 to 4 weeks, which is going to make George Pickens the main wide receiver potentially for at least this week. And without Lamb last week, he caught 5 of his 9 targets for 68 yards and a touchdown. This matchup is going to be way more difficult for Pickens, but the volume will probably be there. And matching that up with the big play potential, I'll list him as a start. CeeDee Lamb, I'm going to put as a fringe start. I don't know if he's playing yet or not. If he does, awesome. We'll have to put him in our lineup because he's freaking CeeDee Lamb. But if he doesn't play, then obviously he's a sit. Garrett Wilson has been super impressive to begin the year. He's been the wide receiver 6 and the wide receiver 4. 13 targets last week. He caught 10 of them for 84 yards and a touchdown. That's a massive stat line, and he's killing it with the volume right now. And in this matchup going up against Miami, we will continue to do the same thing because Miami's defense has not been that great. Now, they definitely haven't been great at stopping the run, but clearly, in this matchup, Garrett Wilson could have a decent amount of upside to go with it. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are basically fringe starts if it's not a locked-in top 10 matchup for them. This is probably going to be a game where you could see some decent upside for either of them, or you could see them being a little bit closer to the floor. Has Tyreek Hill been awful this season? No, he isn't. He's had over 100 yards a couple of weeks ago. He had a touchdown last week and a pretty solid day. Jalen Waddle's got a couple of touchdowns. Both of them are playing okay right now. Not what we've expected from Miami in the past, but not enough to give up on either of them, and they both are good wide receiver 2 candidates right now. I don't think they have the upside of a wide receiver 1 currently, so to me they're more of a fringe start. Their upside is wide receiver 2. If they don't hit that, they're more of a wide receiver 3 potential flex option, but they're still fantasy viable. The big question this week is who is Sauce Gardner on, and if it's Tyreek Hill, does that greatly lower his ceiling? And if it does, do you just look elsewhere for a wide receiver with a little bit of a better ceiling, and you come back to Tyreek Hill in a different week? Yeah, Denver is allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Yep, they have one of, if not arguably, the Best cornerback in all of football. And yep, I'm still starting Ja'Marr Chase. How do you sit Ja'Marr Chase? You drafted him probably first overall. And if you didn't in the top 3, I mean, who out there got Ja'Marr Chase outside the top 3? When are you sitting that guy? Like, what type of lineup do you realistically need to have where you're sitting your number 1 pick 4 weeks into the season because it's a tough matchup? I get they don't have Joe Burrow and that it's Jake Browning, and I completely understand that. And I have to anticipate that they're going to use motion to get Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins both away from Patrick Surtain as much as possible. And while their upside is lower this week, Ja'Marr Chase is still in your lineup. You can't sit him. You just can't do it. T. Higgins, you can sit. Do you want to do it? Probably not, but I wouldn't blame you for it. And if you've got a guy that you feel is safer, then let's go ahead and roll with a guy that's kind of a better fit as a floor play than what T. Higgins is. I still expect a ton of inconsistencies with these wide receivers as well. There's several teams right now where it's like you don't know who the wide receiver 1 is going to be in any given week. And the guy who's the wide receiver 1 week, like Troy Franklin, could completely disappear the next week, like Troy Franklin. In this matchup, I am willing to say Troy Franklin is a fringe start for me. We could see him with a decent amount of volume. Courtland Sutton, I mean, he's going to be the guy. He's been the guy 2 of 3 weeks so far. Now, if we get through 7 weeks of the season and he's only been the guy for 3 weeks, then we reconsider it. But this was kind of our concern at the beginning of the year with this wide receiver core, is the fact that you could see guys up and down and in and out. Headliner Nation, there's my breakdown on wide receivers this week. And hopefully it was good enough for you that you can make some decisions on who you're going to play, who you're going to sit, and maybe if you feel a little bit more comfortable about the guys you are rolling out. For now, Headliner Nation, though, I'm going to get on out of here. I've got quarterbacks that I need to go record. But hit that like button for me. Subscribe to the channel. Think about becoming a member. And most importantly, turn on the bell notifications and leave a comment down below so you interact with the content. And then also, you know when we're dropping the content too. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.